Welcome everybody. So today I'm going to show you how to glaze your plaque. So we're going to start with how to glaze these black lines, how to add on the borders and other colors using Celadon once you have those lines established. I started with my moth and I filled in with my black underglaze. So the underglaze, when we're doing these tiny little lines, I don't end up clear glazing these tiny little lines, but it's easier to get the lines in there first and then do the white back technique and do any cleanup that you need to do. So this side I've already done, and on my wider areas in a couple spots, there was a little bit of, funkiness that I'll need to fix. But remember, do this at the sink so you can always make sure you have a clean sponge. But I like to squeeze my sponge and kind of dab, right? If I'm dabbing across, sometimes it'll make a little messy bit and you just clean it up, right? So you want to continually use a clean part of the sponge. That's why this is easier if you do it at the sink. Because if you just leave it like this, it's going to be kind of funky, right? But if you keep going with a clean bit of sponge, you can get it pretty clean. Now, if you do have some parts that got a little bit wiped off, then you can fix that by just taking one of your skinny paintbrushes. Now, if your skinny paintbrush is like really floofy, just get it wet so you can get it to a point, because you just want like a little teeny dab of underglaze, and I'm just gonna dab it into any of the spots that got funky. Since we're not using this for food, that's why it's okay if these lines don't have clear glaze on them. If we were gonna use it for food, then we might make a different choice. Okay, so for me on this one, I think that looks pretty good. There's a little bit more wiping that I could do right there. I'll just dab it a little bit. And if you go from a different direction, sometimes that helps too. So that looks pretty good. Okay, so if I cover that up with the other type of glaze, the Celadon, then it should be fine. So for like this one, I wanna kind of show you like using multiple brushes is a good idea. So this one, because it's my Thundercats logo, the background is red, so I'm gonna use the red underglaze. And since I carved with a really crisp line, I can get this underglaze like right up against most of the edges without it blobbing over for the most part. Now, skinny lines, that's a little bit harder. So like I use the bigger brush for the bigger areas, and I'm gonna use a smaller brush for the smaller areas. But notice how like it's a thick layer, right? I want it to be a nice thick layer. Now for this kind where it's mostly big, if I do where I squeeze this real tight and kind of lift from the outside, I can get that edge usually without messing up the rest of my design. But where it's like, over the eye and stuff, I am just gonna have to kind of do my normal like floofiness. If it's the skinny lines, you can put a little bit more pressure on here to get it nice and even. So now that looks pretty good to me. So now remember, I want to do the celadons with this, right? Part of this is learning how to do the celadons. So just like in this one where it has that unifying color, it's got that border that we talked about multiple times. This one has the border, and I know the Thundercats logo is black on the inside. Now, a good way to get your celadon in there is, I know I have a black underglaze, but I also have a black celadon. So instead of trying to underglaze this whole thing, I'm gonna use the celadon for this. So remember, for the celadon, we're just gonna take the whole bottle to our desk. Now, this one's really thick, but if you can scoop it, you can use it. Now, to do this really neatly, you still wanna make sure you get a nice, like, thick layer, but if you get a nice kind of blobby layer, you can push it up towards the edge of your line, and you can still keep it nice and neat. It takes practice. That's why we've been doing all the practice that we've been doing with the other projects. Okay, so you want to make sure you've got enough on your brush, but you really want it to be like on the tip of your brush. So if it's not in the right spot, just wipe it off and do it again. So if I put it kind of a blob, and then I push the blob towards the edge, I can make sure if I'm pushing from the center and out towards the line, it's easier to make sure that it doesn't get in the line than if you try to brush it next to the line. But this will still make a nice thick layer. Okay, so you can see how I've got right up against that line without overlapping, right? And it's the same thing for the outside. So you would continue that, you know, smaller areas, like if you have little detail areas and stuff, trying to use the smallest brush that you can find is a good plan. And if it starts to get where it's not pointy anymore, just get it wet, like wash it, so you can really add in those little details in there. So I'm just gonna get a wee little baby bit of the glaze, and I'm gonna real carefully tap a little bubble. I'm just gonna keep the little end of my brush loaded, and it just made a little bubble of glaze. So load my brush multiple times, and I'm just making a little bubble of glaze. And because of how I carved it, it wants to stay inside, like it wants to stay on the inside. It doesn't want to go past the edge of the lines. So that's why good carving works to your advantage for the glazing bit. But keeping the tip of your brush loaded is really helpful for this part. All right, happy glazing. Thanks everybody. Make good choices.